A quick disclaimer before we begin, the PEMF podcast does not contain any medical advice, and the content provided is for informational purposes only. If you have any health concerns, please visit a healthcare professional. Welcome to episode 20 of the PEMF podcast.
And welcome back to episode 6 of the mini-series PMF Talk, where we answer your PMF related questions that you've left us on our social media platforms, which include Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, and much more. If you want to hear your question answered in the next episode of PMF Talk, just make sure to leave them in any one of them platforms I just mentioned, or wherever you're listening from, and we'll make sure to get it answered. And our first question comes from TikTok. Great channel. When are your Celerate mini mat and travel mats coming out, and what Gauss will they admit?
So yeah, good observation, because if you've seen the Celerate website, it does mention that we're going to have a travel mat and a mini mat coming out in this year, which is still the intention. We hope to have that released by the end of the year. And actually, the plan is that it will be the same intensity as the full body mat, but it could possibly be a bit stronger, give you ability to get slightly higher intensities, but still have the ability to lower them. The reason is this, because there's actually going to be less coils within those smaller mats, because obviously it's half the size of the full body mat and a quarter of the size of the full body mat. So we're going to be using less coils within that system. And if we're putting the same input into that, then it could possibly be higher intensity. But it's something that is still ongoing. We're running some tests with it to get all that finalized. But we hope to have those released by the end of the year. And in my optimistic mind, that will be this summer.
And if you are interested in any of the other Celerate products, there are currently the full body mat on the website, and as well the localized applicator is currently both live and you are able to order. But we'll jump into our next question. It comes from Spotify, which was episode 13, which was our buyer's guide episode. And it just says, what device do you recommend?
So the best way to answer that is, because really one shoe doesn't fit all. It's a tricky one. But what I can do is tell you what my daily routine is, what devices I use. So on a daily kind of basis, I would use the Celerate. So I've got the Celerate with the full body mat, and I'm either using that in the morning or in the evening, and I've just got that on my sofa, so I'm using the ability of the full body mat on that. The other device I do reach out for quite often is the HUGO Intense, and that's a device that can be used. It's designed more for home use, but super high intensities. And I would use that on 1 to 2 times a week because of the fact I have access to the Celerate device as well. This one's just a super easy, and it's like a proper hit of PMFs and a super recharge. And so I don't necessarily need to do that every day. I'm getting those benefits from my Celerate, but the HUGO Intense gives me that kind of extra level of intensity that's needed. On top of that, again, it really comes down to the end user. So we recommend people kind of reach out to us, tell us what they're trying to achieve and how often and when they think they can use a PMF system, and then we can point you in that right direction.
Yeah, definitely. This is kind of why we, on the NewMed website, we actually offer PMF consultations, which you can book. They're 15 minutes, anywhere from 10 a.m. to 2 a.m. in the afternoon. And we can answer all them questions that Andy just said. Or alternatively as well, there's always the episode 13 that this question came from, which was actually our buyer's guide episode. If you want to listen to that, that might also help you make a little bit of a decision on what you might buy. But we're going to our next question. Once again, it comes from TikTok. If PMF is so good, why wouldn't it be better for pregnancy?
So pregnancy is one of those areas it comes under the same category as, dare I say it, cancer or, some of the unknowns. There is a warning on most tablets, there is a warning on most devices and things that says do not use during pregnancy. And the main reason for that is because it's just untested. To be able to run some clinical trials using the Celerate or using any of the other PMF devices on pregnant people is, a bit of a red tape activity. So it's not for the fact that it's negative towards the pregnancy, and it's not for the fact that it could cause any harm. It's more for a fact of a legal standpoint and the reason why pregnancy is one of those grey areas when using PMF devices. Personally, I can say that my wife used a PMF device during her pregnancy, and it was only offering her benefits at the time, but that was a choice that she took. And, so it's not something we can recommend, but it's kind of one of those gray areas.
Okay, great. I know that's quite a commonly asked one or a commonly confused one as well. But we'll move on to our next question. Once again, it comes from TikTok. This was actually once again on our first TikTok that we ever posted, which was a little clip from our first ever actual podcast, which was on your story. And it just says, "What brand? I need one." Obviously, in that, I think you're referring to the device that you used way back when. What device was that? And then obviously compared to what device do you use now?
So the device I used when I first discovered PEMF was actually a device called Magnetovital. It's a German brand that we actually don't stock anymore. And one of the reasons we weren't stocking that, I don't know if it's improved it from then, but the actual design inside the mat was a little bit flimsy, and we used to get a lot of breakages from it. So people would sit on the mat, and it wouldn't last as long as we wanted them to. So with NewMed, we're kind of unbiased. We hold a number of different PEMF devices. And we do we do move between different systems because of technical abilities or success stories and that sort of thing. But, personally, it was the only device that I had access to at the time, and it had great results for me, and I'm sure it will have great results for everybody else. But if I went back to choose, I would probably choose a different system now, knowing what I know, with slightly more intensity.
But just in case anyone obviously missed the last question or 2 questions ago, what device is it that you're using predominantly now? Because obviously in that video, you're wearing one on your arm. So what one was that?
Yeah, so the Celerate device is one that I use most often now, and that's a device that actually I helped to design, and we launched that last year, and that is moving into the worldwide market now. So that's one that should be accessible anywhere. And the biggest driving factor for me creating that device was that it's just one that can kind of integrate into your life the easiest. The worst thing about people buying PMF devices for me is them just simply not using it. So, which sounds a bit crazy when people are spending 5, 10, 15, even 20,000, pounds, dollars on these devices. But if you get a device that you really have to dedicate time to, and you have to go to a spare room, lay down for half an hour, and all those sorts of things, sometimes it just becomes a habit that you fall out of, and it just doesn't get used or utilized as much. So we created something that was completely battery operated, really easy to carry around, travel with, lightweight. It has the right intensities, and it's super easy to use. So that's the device that I use most frequently. And as I mentioned before, I use higher intensity devices like the HUGO. And I'm pretty sport for choice because we sell a whole number of different devices, and we've got demo units for all. But they're my personal preference. They're my favorite ones that I use most often.
Okay, great. Going on then to our first actual question from an Instagram story. If you aren't following us on Instagram, I think you should. We've just dropped a recent post about magnetizing water and the effects that water has once it's being magnetized. We occasionally drop some studies over there as well. All kind of clips, all PMF related stuff. Definitely worth a follow if you are interested in that. But the question states, Gauss strength. How much importance do you place on it for full body and spot treatment?
So for me, I've mentioned this in other podcasts, and intensity is a really important factor for me. It's not so much, the highest intensity you can possibly get, the better. It doesn't really work too much like that. But there are devices out there which I feel just aren't strong enough. There was a collection of studies that were put together, which we can share at the end of this podcast, and it's a summary of a number of different studies, and it's looking at the results from those studies and what intensities are the most effective when it comes to PMF. Their conclusion came to that a device that offers 10 Gauss to 100 Gauss, so any device that offers from 10 Gauss to 100 Gauss, was the most clinically effective in their eyes. So it's not like you have to go for something that's going to offer you 7,000 Gauss, really strong intensity systems. Some people prefer those systems because you can kind of feel the thing kicking you. But we kind of move away from these like 1 Gauss systems that is kind of old hat to us now. It's the older technology kind of tend to have the lower intensity. Some of the manufacturers have just kind of run with that and they're still going with it. But when we look at the intensity drop off, the further away you get away from those coils, by the time you get to certain areas of the body, the intensity becomes quite important. So my eyes is look for a decent all-rounder system if you're new to PEMF from anything from about 10 Gauss to 100 Gauss. When it comes to localized treatments, again, more intensity tends to be better because if you've got a localized system, your treatment range from that system is going to be quite small because you're only effectively looking at 1 coil or an on-the-spot treatment. We tend to recommend that people go for a full body mat as a basis to PEMF therapy. So if someone's just broken their ankle and they want to just apply a device to their ankle, then yes, they will get benefits. But if they're laying on a full body system and applying something to their ankle, it's going to really accelerate those results. So kind of coming back to that, my view, intensity is super important when looking for a decent PEMF device. And if you want just a general rule to look at something that's going to offer you between 10 and 100 Gauss.
And as Andy mentioned, I'll drop the study in the description of wherever you're listening from with a header, something like 10 to 100 Gauss study, and I'll just put the link underneath if you do want to have a little bit more of a read of that. But our next question actually comes from YouTube, and specifically YouTube Shorts, which are obviously an alternative to TikTok. So if you don't have TikTok, but you still want to watch some of our clips, make sure to head over and you can watch them on YouTube Shorts. But this one actually comes from a clip that we did for the CFS and kind of having more energy. So I assume they're kind of relating this question to how do you feel more energy? And their question was, which frequency and how long each session?
So when looking at kind of like alertness and giving yourself energy with the PEMF system, so this is when intensity becomes a little less important when we're talking about chronic fatigue syndrome and we want to be energizing ourselves and in the mornings and we want to be kind of bringing ourselves back down again in the evenings. It is a bit more important to what frequency we're using. The brainwave frequencies of beta and gamma are the two kind of brainwave states that we want to be working with when we're trying to bring ourselves up. But a general rule on a lot of PEMF systems is about 24 hertz. So 24 hertz and above is considered like a higher frequency when it comes to PEMF. And that is the frequency that our brain is kind of operating in when we're kind of like completely conscious, alert, and focusing, directly focusing on things. So they're the sort of frequencies you want to be using, something 24 and above, and just a normal PEMF session, depending on which device you have, and that does kind of change by the intensity. But a general rule would be 10 to 20 minutes. So to answer that in simple terms, you're looking at 10 to 20 minutes on a PEMF device on a frequency about 24 hertz and above.
As well, kind of just as a general rule, maybe would that be once a day for that 10 or 20 minutes, or twice a day, 3 times, 4 times? How many times?
So ideally once a day, and that is important to be doing that first thing in the morning. So you won't want to be running those frequencies in the evening because that could disturb your sleep.
Okay, great. So we'll move on to our next question. It comes from Reddit. It's kind of a bit of a combination of a lot of different questions because it always kind of comes up after different brands and different devices, but they're all kind of asking the same thing. And a lot of the time, they're just talking about the multi-therapy mats, kind of the ones that do the 5 different therapies, like the heat, and a lot of that. You'll see them about. They look very similar. Places like Alibaba seem to stock them. What is kind of your opinion on these? Because this is kind of what people seem to be trying to gauge about them. What would you kind of say about them?
Combining different therapies can be super effective, and it also can be super ineffective. And it depends. It really does depend on what the systems are. There is a device out there that claims to be a PEMF mat. I won't name any names, but it's relatively cheap in comparison to other PEMF mats. It includes a far infrared inside it and also some crystals that all claim to have these different effects. The problem with these systems, if they were done properly, they could be pretty effective. But the majority of those systems on the market and the ones that we see with the big players, if we look at the PEMF side of those mats, so we've looked at the technical abilities of one of those mats and one of the really big brands, and the intensity of that was something like 0.00008 Gauss. So we mentioned in a podcast recently about the Earth's natural energy, and that is anything up to 0.65 Gauss. So, really anything 0.65 and less is just pointless to be in a PEMF system. So it's the age-old saying of jack of all trades, master of none. A lot of these systems kind of just throw in loads of different therapies, tick a number of different boxes, but they do them really poorly. I can't mention too much about the far infrared side of those systems because we don't offer that type of technology. But if you really want to get the best way of combining the big therapies at the moment seem to be infrared and PEMF, and my personal recommendation and what we see a lot of our clients doing and they're getting super results with is to stick with a PEMF device that is just PEMF, because that device has been, they're specializing in one therapy and they're going to be doing it correctly, hopefully, if it's a decent PEMF system. If you want to combine that with infrared, then actually these bed saunas that kind of like hover over the top of you and have all the nice red infrared lights going down them, you're getting the infrared from the top half that way and PEMF from the bottom half. That's where we're seeing the best benefits, and that does come at a cost. You are kind of spending to get the best of both worlds in that scenario. But if you're going to create a mat that combines everything, you're also confusing a bunch of different frequencies. To get far infrared, you're using super high frequencies. To get a true PEMF device, you're using natural lower frequencies. You need to use, with those systems, blockers, effective blockers, to block out the high frequencies if you're going to get the benefits of the PEMF. And again, if it's not done correctly, if it's not done to a really good level, then it's just not going to work the way you want it to and the way you hope it's going to. So I haven't personally seen a mat yet that has PEMF and far infrared built in it correctly, as to what I would say is a really, really decent system. Someone might prove me wrong. Someone might contact me after this with a really good system. But until now, all the big players in the market, I would avoid.
So they're kind of more maybe towards grounding mats rather than PEMF mats, if they are either one of the two.
In a way, yes, because looking at the intensity of those systems, they're closer to like grounding systems. But then when you're looking at the infrared side of it, again, it's a lot less natural frequency. So it kind of pulls you away from that grounding again.
So we move on to our last question. Once again, it came from Spotify, episode 15, which was our last PEMF Talk episode. And the question reads, is there any data about certain diseases, e.g. fatigue, flu, cancers, etc., having their own frequency? It would be the healing with PEMF devices matching the disease state. Thank you.
So interesting question. And to be honest, it's not one that I completely understand where they're coming from, but I'll answer it to the best of my ability to what I think that person's trying to ask. So what I think they're trying to say is like, does flu have a certain frequency? Does cancer have a certain frequency? Can we create a device that almost treats those specific frequencies? It's also maybe confusing different technology on the market. There's something that we might actually do a PEMF podcast on is how PEMF devices are different and relate to something like a bioresonance or a Rife machine. my knowledge of Rife machines are that they effectively do just that. They read the body, they tell you what's happening, and they deliver frequencies as to what it thinks is the best treatment protocol. Sounds quite good, but the evidence is just lacking at the moment, and the scientific knowledge is not quite there yet. The Rife machines were banned in the US for a number of years because it's almost like replacing the doctor with a machine, and the evidence just isn't there yet. So I think that's what that person is trying to ask. PEMF is a different type of technology that we're just enhancing natural frequencies. So, we are delivering natural frequencies to the body. We're allowing the body to use those frequencies to better heal itself through a number of different kind of byproducts of the PEMF therapy that we'll go into in more detail. And it's not as if we're trying to treat specific things. We're working on the body's ability to heal itself. So I think that might answer that question. It might open more questions, but we'll find out.
And yeah, if we haven't answered a question, if you could leave it once again in the Spotify, in the comments section, in the polls bit, that'd be massively appreciated. Maybe give us a little bit more context on how we could answer it better. But if you would like to see your answer or your question answered in the next PEMF talk, if you leave it under whatever platform you're listening on, as I already said, we'll make sure to get back to you and answer that as soon as possible. And all of the devices that we have spoken about in today's episode, I will link in the description below, along with any of the other studies that we have mentioned.
Thanks for listening to that episode of the PEMF podcast.